Everybody stand. Let's do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll do an invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Let us pray. Almighty God, here we are. We keep coming here and asking your favor. And for the most part, gosh, you have favored us greatly. Thank you for your continued blessings. Thank you for the growth and the integrity of that growth in this town. Bless us as we move forward tonight and in general. Amen. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, anything to add to the agenda? Madam, okay, no, you got it on. Anything else? Motion to approve the agenda?
I make a motion that we approve the agenda.
All in favor, raise your right hand. It is so moved. All right. Davenport and Company. Kyle and David are. Okay. Just to remind people that the town goes through a somewhat grueling analysis to be sure we're doing the right things financially. And so how'd we come out? Good. Okay. There you go.
As we then flip to page 5, something else that we have kind of scattered throughout the booklet is a selection of peer comparatives. So wanted to sort of draw some parallels to what neighboring towns, what folks that are in our general region in central North Carolina of a similar size, what do they look like? So we're measuring not just how are we doing, which is certainly important, but how do we look relative to other peer local governments? And for the mayor, there's some science in who we picked here in the sense that similar size, similar geography, but if there's someone that you or the manager or anyone else wanted to sort of add to that, we can certainly do that in another pass.
Our population probably was underreported. It says about 5,600. I'm sure we're up into 6,000s now, at least. Let me ask you a question. I noticed there are 3 towns, Zebulon, Clayton, and Sanford, that have Moody's ratings, and one of them has an S&P. What would be the advantage and what's involved in this town getting a credit rating?
It's a very good question. So first and foremost, those credit ratings serve as a benchmark and a bellwether if we go borrow dollars outside, especially in the public credit markets, but with banking institutions too. No different than your personal, maybe you've looked up your personal, credit score. The higher the credit rating, the lower the interest rate. And so that's primarily what those credit ratings serve to do. So the places that you mentioned, Clayton has a capital program and a need to borrow dollars that for years, given their growth and size, has been of a scale that is bigger than what we have, at least what we historically had in Anger. I think if I can read into your question a little bit, is a credit rating potentially in our future? I think it probably is.
What's involved in the credit rating, getting the credit rating?
Yeah, so you would go to, there's really 3 major rating agencies, and they're all listed right there. Moody's, S&P is short for Standard & Poor's, and Fitch is the third. Each independent. What you would really do as a town is we'd put a bunch of information together on those 4 things we just talked about, the economy, the finances, the debt, and the management. And we would go to each of those entities and present that information, kind of put our best foot forward, tell our story, both in terms of the economy and the finances side of things. And then they would give us a credit rating in response to that.
So in a sense, it's a global rating that you could use anytime during the period that it's valid, as
Correct.
opposed to having to do that each time you go for a loan.
Yeah, that's correct. Once you have that credit rating, as long as you keep your information with the rating agencies up to date, there is a global rating of the town and its overall financial wherewithal. Typically what happens is when indeed you or anyone else, like I just came from Johnston County. So Johnston County was just upgraded to AAA, which is exciting for them. And so each time they go forward with a new borrowing, we go back and talk to the rating agencies and update them on the latest in terms of their economy and their finances. But it's a broad-based assessment of the financial wherewithal of the town,
Would
the
the
local government.
board be okay to ask the town manager to work with him to talk about the process and come back to us? Does that make sense?
Yes, I was just about to ask the question, what is the cost of these kind of research? And nobody's doing this for free. I know that.
That's correct. That's probably that's exactly the logical. You jumped right in there. So each one of those does charge a fee in order to give you that credit rating. And so that probably ranges for someone of your size in the $20,000 to $30,000 range to go and get that initial rating and have that outstanding.
Okay. It just saves a lot of effort on each individual thing, each individual project, for instance.
I think what I would suggest is in the short run, we can by all means do a little homework and figure out if you'd like to go forward with that, we certainly can. As we talk through the financing for the police station that's in here, I don't think we need a credit rating for that. And so if
But the
we wanted to-
gathering of the information would essentially be what you need to do for a credit rating, right?
It's yes and no. Yes and no. So I think if I could, Mayor, I'd be happy to work with the manager and maybe put
Elizabeth,
together
yes.
yeah, exactly, and put together some thoughts with Elizabeth and bring it back to you.
Okay, fair enough. Let's at least look at it and see if it makes sense.
Bob, in question of what you were just asking, and I would like to clarify from you just a little bit. I understand what you're saying, that when you have a financial packet together and you're not doing it over and over again, but I would be surprised that these places are just going to accept this packet without still doing all of that other work. It may be of benefit to have it, but I don't think it's going to replace the groundwork that would have to go to the process of borrowing money. Am I making sense in what I'm saying?
Yes, in the sense of, so we'll use for the moment the police station.
Sure, great, yeah.
It's a couple tabs back, but we'll talk
Yeah.
about it for the moment. The process that we as a town, with your blessing, obviously with Elizabeth and everybody else, would go forward is going to be what it is, regardless of whether we have a credit rating or not. So it's kind of an ineloquent way of saying the same amount of work and the same process is going to be required, whether or not there is a credit rating involved in it. You don't really, for this particular process, you don't need a credit rating to go through with the USDA side of things. And it's because it's a federal government program.
So what I'm hearing then after that, and back to what you were saying, Bob, I'd certainly be fine with Elizabeth just getting. I don't want to do a lot of work here for something I just don't think we're ready for. I mean, when I look at the growth of these towns, we're just not there yet.
Well, that's
and all
part
you
of
had
the
to do was say
question,
$30,000 to me, and I'm like, no, we don't need this. We're working without it right now. But as I just don't want to put somebody to work
I understand.
on
Just-
stuff that they don't need to be working on.
Yeah.
Am-
Just wanted to ask some preliminary questions.
Yeah,
Okay.
but we will by all means, we'll do a little homework with Elizabeth, put some things together,
Okay.
and certainly.
But I interrupted you.
No,
Go
you're fine.
ahead.
That's why we're here. We appreciate it. And so, again, you see the peer group there, and I think you look at the Claytons, and Sanford's obviously a city, but of a certain scale. Those are the types of places that, on a year-in, year-out basis, if they have their capital programs, have those credit ratings. But there are plenty of places that are, call it 10,000 and below, that do indeed have a credit rating. So we'll do a little homework and bring it back to you.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll get behind tab C here, and this section is really an update on how we as a town have fared over the last several years. And focusing for the moment specifically on the general fund, there's some utility stuff at the back. I think for purposes of time, we're not going to go through all those pages, but really focus specifically on the general fund for the moment. Start with the revenue side of the equation here on page 8. If you just look visually at that graph, and I think you probably see this and feel it on a day in, day out basis, very nice revenue growth over the last 5 years. Certainly through the COVID, a lot of people saw a decline in that time period. That clearly did not necessarily happen with the town. If you look at some of the major revenue sources there and look at the growth of them on the far right, ad valorem's been growing at about 7% a year, certainly with some reval and some more growth. That's probably going to pick up its pace. The other taxes and licenses, the sales tax, those kind of things have been growing at a very rapid pace across your region, not just here in the town. And so certainly you've seen that. If you go to the bottom right, growth, average growth, and this is just average growth over the last 5 years, has been 11.7%, almost 12% a year. So you're seeing the growth in the numbers and the revenues, in addition to obviously, probably feeling it out on the street every day. As we flip the page, the other side of that equation is the expenditure side. And as you look at that graph in the top right, it's a little more nuanced in the sense that your expenditures have really, 2018 to 2021, kind of been right in line, a little bit up, a little bit down each and every year. A lot of that has to do with capital expenditures that are a little lumpy, meaning they're not routine. If you make a major investment in some sidewalks or certain projects in a certain year, it may not necessarily translate to the next year. So it's not unusual to see a little bit of fluctuation year over year over that time period. But I think as you look at that trend from 18 to 21, it's really kind of flat. And so your revenues have been growing. Your expenditures have been within a range, not growing at the same pace. The exception being in 2022, and we're going to nuance that because there's some unique aspects to what occurred in 2022 that will break apart a little bit in the next couple pages. So as you just kind of compare those two pages and really flip the page to page 10, what page 10 is doing is simply comparing our total revenues versus our total expenditures. And if you go to, just take your eye, the graph certainly does it, and the numbers are right here. This bottom line net change in fund balance, that is positive by a pretty healthy margin each of those years, fiscal year 2018 to 2021. And so as we think about that, we've got good positive revenues over expenditures. We're in the black, so to speak, doing what you need to do because your revenues are growing and you've kept expenditures in line. As you get to 2022, and this caught our eye, but then we dug in some more, there is a decline in your fund balance in 2022 in the range of about $750,000. And so as we dug more into those numbers, there's a reason or a rationale that you as a board and public are, I'm sure, aware of, but we wanted to highlight it. In that negative in that year, and if you flip the page to page 11, was really driven by cash-funded capital expenditures. So as we're looking at these numbers, as we're looking at audited financials, we always like to break apart what are our recurring annual expenditures, typically salaries, typically keeping the lights on the buildings, those things that each and every year we just have to do to run the town. We tend to break those apart from, again, the capital expenditures that if you make a major investment in one year, that may last you for 5-10 years. And so those capital type expenditures tend to be a little bit lumpier, if you will, to use a non-technical term. So in 2022, you as a town made about $1 million of investment, at least as far as we could tell from the audit, in the cash-funded capital, meaning we didn't borrow those dollars. You had, as a town, saved up the money, no different than if maybe in your personal finances, in your home, you say, you know what, I'm going to need to replace the roof in 5 years. I'm going to need to change out the air conditioning in 5 years. I'm going to start saving now and thus be able to pay cash for it when I need it. That's my simple corollary to what you've been able to do as a town through 2022. And so I just want to break that out because, again, you had 4 very solid years. And that 5th year, which is FY, meaning fiscal year 2022, again, you made some cash-funded capital investments in the town. So where do those dollars come from? On page number 12, the fund balance. And so you'll recall, Mayor and members of the board, from past years, we talk a lot about fund balance. It's arguably the single most financially important aspect of any local government, whether it's a town or a city or a county. It's sort of that bellwether and benchmark from a finance standpoint. You as a town have done a very good job of stewarding those dollars over the years. I would take your eye to the unassigned fund balance, and you can see how that has grown from about 3.2 million to about 5.2 million from 2018 to 2021. And then again, no surprise, it declined in 2022, but that was because, again, you as a town were making some investments that you'd save the money up for, in essence. Again, using my simple corollary. That's okay if you flip the next page, because you as a town have a policy relative to how much fund balance we should keep on hand at a minimum in any given year as you measure it at the end of the annual audit. And so that policy says that we'd have no more than 50%,
Less than.
no less than, thank you. I think we might need to change that in our book there, but no less than 50% of our annual expenditures in reserve in that unassigned fund balance at the end of each year. And so as a town, especially when it's growing, you really want to have a higher than even your policy fund balance. As you think about going forward, whether it's a police station or the capital projects, that fund balance is going to be kind of your first line of defense against surprises. If the growth does slow down at some point, you want to make sure you've got that very healthy cushion, especially knowing that we're growing and a lot of things are going to change. So your policy is at 50%. At the end of 2022, you were at about 78%, call it roughly 80%. So you get some margin over and above that.
We were at 1 to 2 times fund balance, and the board, as I recall, changed that to where we had to maintain at least 50%.
Yep.
We only have to maintain like 17% because of the state, but
That's right. That's right. And most local governments are going to have a policy that'll be over and above what the state mandates in the state statute. And I think for you as a town, and we see this a lot in growing places, having 50% is it's a solid number. It's a good number. You drew it down a little bit between 21 and 22. Your 23 audit, be done the next couple months. We'll see where that lands. It sounds like it should be in decent shape. I don't want to presuppose that for the moment. So I think having a cushion over and above that 50% would be a good idea. Again, knowing that, and this is obviously all your decisions, but knowing that there's capital that you're thinking about, knowing that as growth comes, there's going to be needs that go along with that growth. And so maintaining that margin of error over and above the 50% policy, I think is a good thing. We'll go to the next page, and just to give you a sense of what others are doing in terms of peer comparatives. So this is just sheer dollars in the fund balance. And so you can see I'm going to take your eye to the right-hand side, which is that unassigned fund balance. If we're a shade below $5 million, you can see we're basically right at the median just in terms of the sheer dollars relative to all those peers. If you flip the page, it's important to take those dollars and equate them to what that means to us as a town. We all have different size budgets. And so as you look again at that right-hand side page, right-hand side graph, what that graph is doing is equating the unassigned fund balance, which again is that sort of most critical portion of the fund balance, to the size of our budget. And so there you stack up very, very well.
very well, yes.
Relative to the peers. Arguably, you're the strongest of all of those relative to all those various peers. And I think, again, that's a good thing to be doing right now, knowing that you're likely to be taking on a bunch of needs to accommodate the growth, so you've got that margin for error in there.
Well, what had happened was we inherited a really large fund balance from our predecessors, and the board didn't feel like it was fair to the public to just leave that money sitting there, so we compromised at a little bit lower policy for fund balance and try to use the money for the benefit of the town. So,
yeah, and I think as you look at that, I think that was a totally warranted, financially responsible, good compromise to make. I mean, there is a limitation on you'll rarely hear people like us say you've got too much fund balance, but there is that middle ground,
right,
whereby you don't want to be sitting on too many dollars, because again, you want to put those to the work in the public. And so I think finding that middle ground, that policy at 50% is the floor for the moment, I think is a good thing. And I think maintaining some cushion over and above that if we're
Right.
going to go start and build a couple things, I think is very much warranted as well.
One of the major things is the hurricane.
Yep.
Traditionally, if your town has some hurricane damage, it might be 2, 3, 4 years before FEMA gets around to paying you back
That's right.
that money. So you've got to have a cushion at least for that. But it's just fiscally sound in the first place to have a good reserve.
That's right. And the other thing, you make an excellent point there, Mayor. The other thing that's happened, especially in the last 2 years, is the dollars that you have in the bank can now make you as a town some money. And so as we were talking the last couple of years, interest rates are very low, which was great for going out and borrowing dollars, but the money sitting in the bank was effectively earning nothing. And
Right.
so now rates on the borrowing side, they're higher, but they're still historically pretty favorable. And you can turn around and reinvest those, whether it's the fund balance or other funds, at a much, I mean, you should be getting probably 5.5% on those dollars, which goes to help offset the pressure on any taxes. It helps to offset the pressure of inflation that everybody's feeling.
Right.
And so that's the other corollary in terms of what's transpired the last 2 or so years.
We realized that our returns on finances were not very good, so our prior town manager reinvested and put together a good package, and that saved a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars for the town.
Yeah, and that certainly does add up, and it really ends up being, I would argue, so to your point on the importance of fund balance, certainly against surprises, natural disasters, just general cash flow, surprises against capital projects that hopefully are very much on budget, but that just hasn't been the environment we're in. So you've got all these various reasons, and on top of that, if you have that $5+ million, you're able to earn 5% a year. That helps take pressure off the budget.
For instance, we had to cancel the town hall, and there was some expenditures we'd already made there. So, oh well.
That's right. Just a couple other pages here in terms of the general financial overview. Assessed value, obviously, it's the tax base of the town, one of your primary revenue drivers, the one that you tend as a mayor and a board to have the most control over in terms of the tax rate. Been growing very, very nicely with some reval, with new construction. We would expect, although we have no crystal ball, that's going to accelerate here into the future. So I think part of what we'll be doing going forward is to project out and even do some more precise modeling, so to speak, of what does that revenue stream we think really look like under a variety of different scenarios, to kind of get a picture of for the budget, for borrowing dollars. It's a requirement when we go talk to the USDA folks to get some of those projections, and certainly I think they'll be positive, but our other mindset tends to be to look at those under a couple of different scenarios and not count the chickens before they hatch, so to speak, and kind of give ourselves a range. So page 17, just a couple observations. History of producing year-end surpluses. In FY 2022, we in essence saved up some dollars, used that to make capital investments in the town. We've talked about the fund balance and how important that is. I'll just reiterate it. And certainly assessed value we expect is going to continue to grow. So with all of that as background, we'll talk next about really our existing debt profile, which is very, very modest, and some projections going forward. So page 19, this is the town's existing tax-supported debt, really that debt that is paid from and supported by the general fund. We've purposely not included the water and sewer utility in this. It's separate, self-supporting. There's a little bit of information in the back, but just for time, we've not dug into that for tonight's presentation. I think what you see on that graph is a very, very nominal amount of existing debt. And so as you're thinking about growth and planning, et cetera, you've got a very modest sort of basis by which to build, which is a good thing.
I thought we were paid out on the major debt.
Major debt for general fund or for? I believe this is for some equipment in Public Works.
Oh, okay,
There's
okay.
A couple little leases on.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly.
Yeah,
off the
well,
top of my head, but
we went down to 0, and then we did do some,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
right.
Yep. Yeah, and it is. We could look that up, but it's equipment related.
Yep.
And so with that as a background, page 20, similar to the fund balance side, we, in many of your peers, you'll see this, like to look at a couple different ratios. So it's not just the sheer amount of dollars in debt that may be outstanding at a given time. It's how does that relate to the size of our town, with its tax base, the size of the budget. So we've highlighted two ratios here that I'll show you graphically in the next couple pages. Both of these are things we'd recommend that we as a town put in place as a policy, especially knowing we're going to be thinking about making some investments in the future. It gives us a roadmap, gives us some guideposts in terms of what is financially responsible and reasonable to be doing in terms of the outstanding debt. And so it's debt to assessed value, and the second is debt service to expenditures. And I'll show you more what that looks like on the next two pages. So the first of those is debt service to expenditures. This is, if you had to argue one's more important than the other, this one's probably a little bit more important than debt to assessed value. It really measures how many pennies out of every dollar in the budget are going to make a debt service payment. So that graph at the top left is just showing for the moment, given the relatively modest $200,000 or thereabouts outstanding for equipment, what does that ratio look like for us right now? It's less than 1%. So we have less than 1 penny out of every dollar in the budget currently going to make a debt service payment. So it's very, very low. What we would think about is, and if you look, and there's a lot on this page, but there's two little dotted lines up here, is putting a policy in place whereby we as a mayor and the board and town would say formally, we don't want that ratio to be any higher than 10 to 12%. The rating agencies, S&P in particular, says anything below 15% is strong. I think probably a little bit lower level is probably appropriate given the size of our town. So as a next step, something we could think about, especially as we're talking about projects going forward, is to put in place a policy to be anywhere in that, 12 to 15% range. I think I misspoke there, so I was looking at it upside down. You can see comparatively where you are, very low, but others growing at different paces, probably in that 10% range or below.
And that's debt service, not debt, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So that's like our annual payment, no different than if you were to look at your personal finances.
Car
and stuff.
payment or something like that.
Yeah, and there's kind of different rules of thumb. If you're translated to personal finance, sometimes you'll hear you don't want your mortgage payment to be any more than like a third of your monthly income. This is a similar concept, but at a lower, more conservative level. Say, let's not have our quote-unquote mortgage payment be any greater than 15% of our annual income in that instance. Page number 22, the other ratio that we'd recommend putting in place going forward, this debt to assessed value. So Mayor, to your question, this is the aggregate amount, like the principal amount of the outstanding debt relative to the assessed value. It's just another way of measuring how much debt do we have relative to the size of our town, scale of our town. That graph here, not a mistake, you have an almost imperceptibly small level right now. I think your assessed value is going to continue to grow. So to have anywhere in the 2.5% to 3.5% range in that policy, and we're going to layer on, as we think about a police station going forward, what that looks like. So this is all before, and we have some afters. So page 23, again, just to summarize, you already have a fund balance policy. Obviously recommend keeping that in place. And then going forward, think about putting in place debt service to expenditures, debt to assessed value. I think as we work through the town hall, work through the budget, we can talk about formally putting that in place. With that, I'm going to flip. I'm going to go past 24. I don't want to repeat myself too many times. So we'll go right to page 26. and talk a bit about some of the capital planning, both debt affordability and debt capacity, specifically with respect to the police station. So we've done some numbers, which I think Mayor and members of the board you've seen in the past in terms of really two concepts. One is what we call debt affordability. That is, if we go borrow some dollars and have to get a debt payment into our budget, where do those dollars come from? And can we fit that within our budget? That's debt affordability. Debt capacity is, if indeed we do that, are we still in compliance with those policies and best practices we talked about in the prior section? So this section will talk about both of those concepts. We've used for planning purposes a $6 million project, which really was we know the idea is and the hope and expectation is going to cost a lot less than $6 million. But we sometimes, being the conservative people in dark suits, we like to add a little bit more conservatism in there. So that's just us putting in place something to say, all right, let's test a little bit what our, again, affordability and capacity is relative to our current budget and these ratios. We've assumed in here basically a USDA type of financing. And so what that really means is if you go forward with the design and the bidding and all those kind of things, work hand in hand with the USDA, there's an interim financing component to that, whereby USDA kind of works with you all the way through the construction of the project, but their actual loan doesn't kick in until the project is done. And so there's a process to go get interim financing with the bank so that as you're building that, that's really your source of funds. The USDA loan kicks in at the end when construction's done. And so that's what we've basically factored in here. It's about 2 years of interim financing, kind of like a construction loan, and then USDA kicks in at the end. They do all their approvals in the front end, so you know their loan's going to be there.
Right.
It's just the way they work their program.
Our prior projects were looking at 2% loans instead of 5%. But
the market has definitely changed there. I will say we've used 5 here. That's above current estimate or current market on purpose. So USDA, they don't set their rate until such time as you get further into having plans and specs. And so we didn't want to use today's rate. The market's just too volatile. We like building in some conservatism. It's going to be a couple months by the time you really get to that process. So hopefully it's below 5%. But again, we don't control that. You don't control that. So we like to round up a little bit, give a little bit of margin for error. Importantly, at the bottom of the page, in terms of what's in your 2024 budget, you as a mayor and board did a good job of putting some dollars away into that budget to proactively plan for this project. And so that's really what we have factored in, is thinking about what do we do beginning in FY 2025, because again, as this project, the police station evolves, you're not really going to have any debt service probably until the next fiscal year. And so that's really the focus on the budget side of things, is how do we start FY 25 and future? Do we have the capacity and the affordability within the budget? And the answer is yes, just to kind of cut straight to the chase. So on page 27, again, just walking through some assumptions there. As we run those various numbers on the $6 million, you'd have an interest-only payment, probably around $300,000 plus or minus, during that FY 25 and FY 26 time period. And then again, given these assumptions, and these could all change, but for planning purposes, in and around annual payments of about $390,000, which I think as we all look at the budget, you've got that already built in the budget proactively. So there's not a need to come up with new revenues into FY 25 and FY 26.
And that assumes borrowing most of the money.
Correct. That assumes the moment borrowing the full $6 million
And if
in these numbers.
if we could do otherwise, it would save money.
Correct. Which I think, again, my expectation at least would be you get a process to kind of work through in these building projects, and so you have an ability to kind of work through different scenarios, putting dollars in, not putting dollars in, how much you actually borrow. So we trying to err on the conservative side to start with, hoping that kind of narrows going forward.
We're waiting to hear what the legislature's going to do. We don't know yet, but hopefully they'll help us out some.
And then last point I'll make at the bottom here is, given all these assumptions, you'd really have some capacity over and above that police station to go make some investments, all built within what we see, at least in the current budget. We should also point out, and will point out, because I think you've probably seen it, lived with it, been a little bit immune, I suspect, to it, but given the inflationary environment, everything we're talking about in here is just focused on capital and debt service. So certainly I just want to caveat that, in that we continue to be in an inflationary environment. I think you're probably going to continue to see pressures on wages and utility costs. Inflation seems to be coming down, but it's not going to zero. And so everything we're talking about here for the moment is very much focused just on the capital side, but that doesn't mean that there may not and probably will be other pressures operationally as you get into the 25 budget and beyond. So just want to make sure we make that caveat. I think part of what we'll be doing with Elizabeth and Hans and you going forward is to put a little finer point to some of those things as you think about the 25 budget. But I think it's just important to point that out, in that, again, what we're talking about is really focused on the capital for the moment. There's some more to flesh out in terms of what the operational side of the house looks like.
Well, given the UAW strike, our vehicles may be worth more as used cars right now.
The next couple pages, I'm not going to go through page 28. It's a lot of small numbers we can focus on another day, but really just demonstrating some of the modeling that was done. Page 29 simply shows you graphically when we layer on, again, the very modest amount that we're starting with in terms of existing debt, and work your way through all the way up to what would eventually be the permanent financing for USDA, which we've assumed to be over 30 years. That's just that gold bar right there. So that just visually shows you what that looks like. And I think more importantly, these next couple pages, we've just demonstrated what that looks like, going back to those policies we were talking about. Again, with a $6 million borrowing for the moment, not to say it has to be that, but erring on that side.
Next page, Veronica.
Yep, thank you. That ratio stays at or below about 6%. And so you would have some capacity over and above that police station, again, to take on some additional things at your discretion. But you could argue that certainly that'd be within the realm of what's financially responsible. Flip one more page to page 31, and you see a similar picture on the debt to assessed value, whereby even when we add that police station on there, you're still very much in line with what would be a recommended policy level.
Good.
So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'll wrap up with some next steps, and happy to answer any questions or any clarifications. I think from our standpoint, it's September 19th. Somehow the summer flew by there.
Yes.
But with at your direction, working with Elizabeth, with Dan and everybody, over the balance of the year, we'd be thinking about working through the USDA process, getting them sort of geared back up for all their approvals. There's a bunch of sort of things you need to do to apply. That probably takes, and it's not our call per se, but that probably takes well in the next calendar year to get that all signed, sealed, delivered. At the same time, we'll be doing some budget projections. So I would expect probably in the colder months, we'd be back with some of that information on the USDA financing, and we could do some of that sort of updating of the budget projections, et cetera, at that time period.
Local Government Commission has the authority to approve or disapprove our financing, you don't think Angie would have any problems there?
Not with what we see right now. No, and certainly it's a process we have to go through, and so there's an element of sort of managing both the USDA side of things and the LGC side of things. But I think if your audit is on time, your fund balance is strong, you've got annual surpluses, which you have, putting some policies in place I think would be helpful there as we go talk to them and think about some approvals. They'll definitely want to have a guaranteed maximum price, which is probably the next topic of conversation, but before they would approve anything, they'll kind of mandate that we as a town have that in place.
Questions from the board?
I did want to tell you all that we had a preliminary pre-application call with the LGC, just talking through a lot of these numbers with Kyle and his team, and it was very favorable.
Good job. And good job to you as well. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, no, you are doing the keeping of the straight. I'm not sure that's particularly eloquent, but I'm happy to do it. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Well, pat yourselves on the back, board. Good job. And administration. Okay. All right. So you need a motion to continue with the police station capital project with LGC approval and interim construction loan financing? Okay.
That's correct. We'll be back at there'll be a formal application process that'll probably be next calendar year.
Okay.
So we'll be back with all that with.
Well, then you won't be dealing with some of us, unfortunately. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're in charge. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Next. Yes.
Yes, we will need a motion for this agenda item. I'd like to just brief the board and the public on the selection of a design build firm. We did an RFQ, which Richard Hicks, our interim manager, set the process up very nicely, and it was very easy for me to continue on, so I do want to thank him for that. We received 6 proposals from design build firms, so that is an architect teaming with a contractor and others who are going to provide the interiors, the lighting, the grading, all of those elements that come together in a construction project. So we had a committee made up of staff and 2 of our commissioners, and we scored all of the teams according to the RFQ guidelines. We selected 3 for an interview process, and then through that process, the committee selected Bobbitt and Davis Kane to be the design build team for the town, and that was primarily due to their experience in building police stations and also their familiarity with accreditation standards that drive some of the architectural elements of a police station, such as evidence and the Sally Port. So as you heard from Kyle, we're looking at a $5 million project, which you all discussed in the previous budget year. There's no financial amendment needed tonight, but I would request a motion to award the design and construction of the Angier Police Department to Bobbitt and Davis Kane. Do you have any questions? And Andy Speck, who is going to be our project leader, is available and is here with us tonight.
Why don't we bring him up and see if there are any questions from the board?
Yeah.
Hi there, I'm Andy Speck with Bobbitt Construction. I'll be your project executive, so your project lead. And here with me is Charles Hall. He'll be our construction project manager. So we
Okay.
have no prepared statements, but we
Understand.
certainly.
Any questions from the board?
Need to get it done.
Get her done. All right. Is there a motion?
I make the motion. You go ahead.
To approve awarding the contract to
Awarding
Bobbitt, yes. At approximately $5 million.
Yes, and you will have a detailed contract before you. Hopefully, I don't know that we'll make it for the next meeting, but the next workshop meeting that will spell out timelines, line item budgets like the furniture budget, the grading budget, all of those things. So we have a kickoff meeting scheduled with the chief and with the representatives from Davis Kane and Bobbitt to get that started. And of course, our attorney will review the contract before it comes to you.
Okay. Any further questions or comments? All in favor of the motion, please raise your right hand. It passes unanimously. Okay. Go for it. All right. Okay. Next is Ting.
Basically, this is just a memorandum of understanding by which that we will allow them to place cabinets on our town property in exchange for the free internet. So it's pretty straightforward. If there are any questions.
Trying to find it again, because in one that I read, but the agreement that when I read it did state that
It's a
all town properties, correct? I want to say one said
yes.
one town property in the beginning or something.
I think it did say one.
Yeah,
in the
there
beginning.
were some typos that we fixed.
Okay, because that was my question. I'd seen
Yeah.
one, and it was like, so it is.
It's-
But the type of correction is all town properties.
I believe that's what it says.
Wanna make
currently.
sure.
Make sure that's
That
what
was-
it says in the agenda packet.
Are you talking about where the cabinets are going to be, or where the service is?
where
gonna
the
be?
service will be provided free to the town.
Okay.
The intent
okay.
is that they will provide internet service to the town of Angier.
and to the citizens of Angier for a fee. Yes. Okay.
But
With
you
free
understand?
free to the town
Free.
in exchange for allowing them to place it on the property.
Right. That was it. The understanding.
Yeah, because that was the only thing I wanted to clarify, that it was going to be all the needs that we have in different buildings, not just a choice of town hall, then move it somewhere else or wherever as we move around town. All right. Thank you, Dan.
Yes, that's the intent.
Okay. Fair enough. Is there a motion?
I'll go ahead and make the motion.
Okay. Motion is to approve the memorandum of understanding with Ting Fiber Internet. Any discussion?
And it does say all. I just confirmed by the.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All in favor, please raise your right hand. That's your left hand.
Oh.
Okay. All right. It's three legitimate votes I have. All right. Thank you very much. Okay, then the next thing.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a resolution for you all to adopt. The town clerk has investigated the sufficiency of an annexation petition submitted by the town of Angier for our police training facility. It's located at 298 Smith Drive in Angier. And we're asking you all to adopt that resolution to set the public hearing for the next meeting, which is October 3rd.
Okay. A minute, I'm in the wrong place there. Okay.
You just need a motion, right?
Right.
Shall I? I move to set the date of the public hearing for the annexation petition submitted by the town of Angier on October 3rd, 2023.
Okay, any discussion? Not all in favor, raise your right hand. Okay. And you have another resolution, I think, for voluntary annexation. Is that yours?
I don't think so, Mayor.
So I think it's just the petition and then your, yes.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Normally I print off my agenda, but it's way up at the front, and so I'm wandering through trying to find what's next. I apologize for not being on top. What else we got? Anything else?
Closed session.
Or anything else in the open session? I think that's everything on the agenda. All right, we have a closed session to discuss property matters. Is there a motion to adjourn, to take a 5-minute recess and go back into closed session?
I make a motion that we adjourn.
Okay? And all that other stuff, yeah. All right. Okay. I assume y'all are voting